Hello everyone and welcome to The Information, where you will get all the information on the latest in electronic, indie pop, and experimental music. Today we are doing an album review of the latest Charlotte Gainsbourg record, Rest. Now for those unfamiliar, Charlotte Gainsbourg is a French actress and singer. Her father was the famous French crooner Serge Gainsbourg, and her mother was Jane Birkin, a famous actress. She's worked with an impressive cavalcade of producers and co-writers, including Beck, Air, and Nigel Godrich, who produced the majority of Radiohead's albums. And she's back now with a new album called Rest. And technically it's not a new album in the sense that this came out last November, but I didn't have the time really to take a listen to it until just recently. I'm not planning on making this a habit of reviewing 3-month-old records. I have been a fan of Charlotte's music, especially her previous two albums, IRM and 555, so I did have some pretty high expectations going into this album as well. And there is a pretty equally impressive list of collaborators on this record as well. You've got Paul McCartney writing a song on the record, you've got Conan Moccasin contributing production on a couple tracks here, Owen Pallett does some string arrangements on a few tracks, and you've even got one half of Daft Punk, Guy-Manuel, doing production on the title track, Rest. And that's before even mentioning that French DJ and remix artist Sébastien was responsible for production across the entire album. He performs most of the instruments overall, so you really get a really strong electronic, dance, funk, disco vibe on a lot of the tunes here. Now this record definitely has a big theme of grief and loss running throughout it as well, so this is the first opportunity for Charlotte to really get her thoughts out and her feelings out, and a lot of what she touches on here are themes of grief, themes of loss, themes of acceptance, death. She has a couple tracks here about the death of her father, Serge Gainsbourg, as well as the recent apparent suicide of her half-sister, Kate Berry. So Charlotte definitely had a lot on her mind going into the studio when she wanted to write for this album. And we start off with that very ghoulish, very morbid sound and theme right out of the gate with the intro track, Ring a Ring of Roses, which is otherwise the fairy tale known as Ring Around the Rosie. You have some phasered chords, a haunted house style synth lead, very creepy atmosphere overall. The first verse, like much of the album, is actually sung in her native French, and the choruses on this song and most of the album are sung in English. However, here the chorus does start a little clunky. She does try to fit a lot of words into the vocal melody, and it doesn't always work, but I do like the bits of string and the 70s sounding squelchy guitar that comes in towards the latter half of the track. Lyrically, she does spend most of her time talking about the nursery rhyme, but she does also talk about growing old with somebody, sharing her first kiss, and then her first love, and then her first gray hair that she notices. So there's sort of also this passage of time kind of theme running throughout the song. And the next track after this is arguably even more morbid, Lying With You, where she literally sings about lying next to her dad's dead body as they're putting him in the coffin. There's some live drumming here, some very intense synth arpeggios, and a very insistent synth chord, just sort of that almost Inception style, like bomb, bomb. The lyrics obviously are incredibly dark and personal on this track, so you have this trauma happening to this very young girl, and it leads to lines in the second verse like, "Where did my kiss go when the coffin shut? I always hear the beating of nails." It paints a very vivid, morose picture. Some sour strings kind of wrap the song up, and they get distorted a little bit, almost like they're stuck in a tape loop that's disintegrating a little bit. Some sour strings wrap the song up, and they also sound like they're sort of being distorted or wrapped up in this tape loop where they're kind of getting disintegrated as it goes along. I did read an article about the album where it said that Charlotte had actually given Sébastien a list of horror movie soundtracks, including the Jaws soundtrack, to kind of give him the vibe for the production on some of these early tracks, and I definitely can see where that's coming from because they give off very strong horror soundtrack vibes for sure. On the third track of the album, Kate, we get another very somber picture of grief, where this time Charlotte sings about the loss of her half-sister Kate. We get some queasy sort of electric piano and some more strings in here as well. Another very creepy sort of instrumental melody where you hear this like dun 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 dun. By the time the chorus kicks in, it's this wordless ascension of just bum 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 bum. And and lots of crashing of cymbals here as well. Though I will say towards the end of the song she does end up singing in her upper register for a little bit of it, and I found that to kind of be her straining a little bit vocally. I felt like her dynamic range was a little bit thin here. After one last ascending chorus that fades the song out, it kind of just gives way and we just hear the sound of Charlotte humming to herself, which gives it a very sort of creepy feeling once again. This leads into one of the singles on the album, Deadly Valentine, and it's the first time that we really get the full funky force of the production of Sebastian on here. This is also the first song on the album that's sung entirely in English, though I will say the lyrics do kind of come across as a tad lazy here, where she's literally just singing the wedding vows. You know, she's literally saying lines like, "From this day forward, for better for worse, until death do us part. With this ring I thee wed, with all my worldly goods I thee endow." It's kind of clunky, it doesn't really work very well within the context of the vocal melodies. The way she sings some of these lines in the chorus is kind of stiff and almost a little robotic. I can kind of imagine a robot just going beep boop boop bop boop boop beep boop boop bop boop boop beep boop boop bop. And the song does kind of wear itself thin pretty quickly. It goes on for about 6 minutes and it really only has enough ideas to sustain about half the length. But we do get a very opulent chorus which does match the very grand, elegant, lyrical content. Lots of string hits again and assertive piano chords. The track after this, I'm a Lie, kind of goes back into that haunted house sound again. We get some more electric piano or like some Rhodes piano, almost like a calliope sounding kind of thing going on. On this track here, this is the first time I really have an issue with her vocals being so breathy and whispery. I feel like they're kind of kicked up to 11 on this track and they kind of become a little too obnoxious to listen to. The next track on here, Rest, is the Daft Punk collaboration with Guy-Manuel. It's a very beautiful, soft, underwater sounding lullaby. This is another track where if you're not a fan of her vocal delivery, it can kind of get on your nerves perhaps. She does sort of do this almost ASMR spoken word delivery of some of the lyrics on here, which can get a tad creepy and uncomfortable. Lyrically here, she talks about wanting to stay with somebody, not wanting to let them go. Doesn't get into super specific detail here. Not sure if it's about a family member or someone who's passed that she's talked about in one of the previous songs. And compositionally, it is a little bit simple. The song itself is basically a loop compositionally, and it's very minimal. But it does kind of work within that lullaby kind of feel once again. It plays into the sleepy tone rather than works against it. And it's one of the shorter songs on the album, just under about 3.5 minutes, so it doesn't overstay its welcome at all. With the next track, Sylvia Says, this is probably undoubtedly the most aggressive song ever written about Sylvia Plath. She pretty much directly lifts lines out of her poem Mad Girl's Love Song. The vocal melody here reminds me of like some lost disco hit or something, like a track that definitely already exists but I can't put my finger on it, that kind of thing. There's some crisp, airy claps on the beat, some lush harp and chords. The chorus is very maximal, very busy, lots of hi-hats skittering around and a very emphatic string arrangement here. And the synth bass line is very funky as well. The track Songbird in a Cage is the Paul McCartney collaboration where he wrote the song and also contributed some instrumentation, some piano and additional drumming as well. This was one of, if not the earliest song that was contributed to the album. It was created back in 2011. And I've got to say I'm not a fan of this one here, not because of Paul's writing or anything like that, but just the production choices, especially with the double-track vocals. They try too hard to be like aggressive and punky and very brash and like attitude-y, but with Charlotte's breathy vocals trying to do this, it's like she's trying to be somebody that she's not. It just really doesn't work. There's also a weird filter on some of the vocals. It makes them really tinny and not have any low end. There's also a very boring, kind of simple one-note progression that goes throughout the song where it's just dun, 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 dun. It gets old really fast. One of the songs on the latter half of the album, the Crocodiles, or the Crocodiles. This is a track that reminded me a lot of the Beck song Paper Tiger off his album Sea Change. As the track sort of advances and moves along, there are lots of orchestral swells that are very similar to the river-like string arrangements in that track, and the drum timbres are kind of similar as well. Clearly I would be very understanding that she would sort of take influence from Beck, considering he co-wrote and produced the entirety of her album IRM, so I'm sure she's familiar with his back catalog. Though compared to Paper Tiger, this song is a little bit more hard-hitting, a little bit more direct. There's some really pounding synth bass in here that starts the track off, and it's kind of complemented or interjected with some really dreamy ascending guitar notes. The only real issue I had with this track was that it kind of ends suddenly, just kind of cuts itself off. But otherwise, this was probably my favorite track on the record, I would say. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about the closing track on the album, Les Oxalis. This is another pretty straightforward disco track. Lots of bongos and busy hi-hats again. There's some really strong piano chords here and a sinewy bass line. We do get a resurgence here of the slightly breathier vocals here, especially during the choruses. This track probably has the biggest juxtaposition between the lyrical content and the instrumental, because we're getting like a full-fledged like disco party here, and we're hearing these really breathy, soft vocals, and Charlotte literally singing about visiting her half-sister's grave while this like party is going on behind her. It's like super weird. It kind of crosses the line from intriguing juxtaposition to just like a total misfire, I think. The song itself pretty much ends at about 3 minutes and 30 seconds in, where we just get like an extended instrumental with a little bit of a synth solo for the last 2 minutes of the track, and then it fades out at about 5:30. But then, this is where it gets interesting. About 30 seconds later, and I looked at the timestamp, and it's literally on 5:55, which might be an intentional reference to her album 5:55, which I hope it is, because that's the kind of Easter egg that I am here for. And when we get to 5:55, we get sort of a hidden track here, where it's just audio initially of Charlotte being interviewed, presumably in her house by somebody. I'm not really sure who, or if it's for like a radio interview or some publication, but you can pretty clearly hear her kids stomping around and making a bunch of noise in the background, and she stops one of the kids and briefly has a conversation with them, and she asks if they listen to her music, and they're like, yeah, we love your music. And Charlotte turns around to the interviewer and she's like, they don't listen to my music. And so Charlotte turns back around to the kid and she's like, well, what kind of music do you listen to? And the kid just like immediately rattles off the ABC song, where he or she is just like singing the alphabet, the A, B, C, D, that kind of thing. And right when the kid gets to Z, it loops back around again, so you hear the kid sing the ABC song one more time, but this time it has a beat behind it, and it's this really crazy, super lavish, over-the-top instrumental. It sounds like the lead singer of M83 got replaced by a 2-year-old toddler. It's really fascinating. I almost bust out laughing as soon as the beat came in. It's really, really strange hearing just this like thumping, insistent like house tune basically, and the lyrics be some toddler singing the alphabet song. It's certainly the weirdest outro that I've heard in a minute for sure. This track alone made me want to talk about this album 3 months after it came out, but that being said, I will say that this album is fairly inconsistent with its instrumental matching and its lyrical content. I will say overall, for her writing debut and as an album in general, it's fine. There are some moments that I liked, some songs that were pretty decent. No songs that were really clunkers, except for maybe, say, the Paul McCartney track or the song that came right after it. And I think that another element that really detracts from the replayability of the album is the lyrical content. It's really hard for me to enjoy albums in the same sense that I enjoy other albums when the lyrical content is so personal and so raw and dark. I don't know if you guys feel the same way about songs and albums like that, you know, but it was a decent listen through. Just not enough really stood out to me or was exceptional enough to really write home about. So I'd probably give this thing like a light to decent 6 probably. But if you guys have taken a listen to this album, what did you think? Did you like it? Did you have a favorite or least favorite track? Did you agree with what I had to say for the most part? Or did you think that I was off the mark? Let me know in the comments. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for watching The Information.